we're not treating others as we want to be treated. We're treating others as they want and need to be treated. And I think that's the distinction in when you're thinking about well-being as the leading factor for driving team performance. It's taking into account what do each of these individuals need to perform at their optimal best and to thrive in work and life.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the Leading Well podcast series by Blemish, where our mission is to have an open conversation for leaders who are creating workplaces that feel good and work better. I'm your host, Christian Brown, the co-founder and CEO of Blemish, and I am excited and grateful to be joined by Kibibi Springs today. How are you, Kibibi?
I'm fantastic. Happy to be
Awesome.
here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your time. And so right now, Kabibi is the VP of Workplace Experience at Hightower. But Kabibi, I would love for you to just share a little bit about your career and what has led you to this point so far.
All right, I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version.
Mm.
Um, Currently, I'm an IO psychologist, so I have a doctorate in IO psychology with a focus on elements of well-being for human sustainability at work. And what got me interested in this path, I started my career in marketing and PR, pretty traditional, pretty fast-paced environment, and ex experienced the stress, the overwhelm of what I would call is career climbing or trying to attain your goals, that you set out for yourself professionally. And at a certain point in my career, I was just having observations about what the rest of my life might look like if I continued down this professional path. And my observations picked up on things that were about life balance and where does life fit into all of this work and career attainment. Um, had like one instance with a panic attack. I would say I was a proud overachiever, a proud multitasker, a proud get it done by any means necessary type of person in the early part of my career.
Mm.
And so I think it surprised even me that I hit this point pretty early in the quest to go, what does all this end up leading up to? And then those questions led to a pivot to leave corporate America and try something different in the entrepreneurial realm that was focused on well-being of employees in particular. So I started a mobile spa company in California with my best friend. We both were, she's a teacher, so burnout and overwork is like built into the job. So she understood the mission.
Yeah.
And our biggest goal was to bring relaxation into the work environment, to have moments where people could bond over just giving themselves some space. As with early entry businesses, we didn't survive because we didn't know enough about how to ride those peaks and valleys of entrepreneurship, but I was still very committed to what I learned, which was that the part that I really wanted to get to in that business went beyond just physical relaxation, and I wanted to use that as a conduit to get to like what's happening mentally. Like when people go to the spa and they take a pause, are they thinking about how they spend their days most of the time and reevaluating that those time commitments and where what they might not be getting enough of? Or is it just, I'm going to take this moment and I'm going to go right back to the grind?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so after I shut that business down, I went to work for a larger type of business. But it was a brand appeal that drew me to them. I wanted to see what it was like to work for this particular entrepreneur's business line. It was one of Richard Branson's businesses. And I knew a lot about, his philosophy on employees and entrepreneurship. So that was of interest to me. And what I learned there was that a founder's mentality can live in a business for years and years if the brand is committed to those principles.
Mm.
So even though that business was shutting down because of industry change, the spirit of what he built that first business on, the Virgin Megastore business, I could see that in every employee that I touched. They were there because they too loved music and they felt some connection to the purpose of this business. What I also learned while going through that closure of that business was an observation of like how little employees were paying attention to the cycle of the business and what the eventual possibility might be. And it was pretty loud at that time. Like this was recession, first recession of my adult existence, like 2008, 2009. Um, I could see shifts that didn't make sense, weren't adding up. The change communication messaging was not what I knew was happening. It was uh, like a low transparency on what's coming up next. Maybe to keep people committed to the mission of what needed to be done to, bring in as much cash flow into the business as possible for whatever the reasons. I started thinking at that point, there's got to be a better way to like accomplish this than just not telling people what's coming down the pipeline. And I'm thinking, people need to plan for their next step. Like if this business is no longer going to be viable, where will they work after this? And it being such a niche industry, lovers of music, I was like, where will these people go to work? And so when that day finally came, I had decided that I would go back to school and study exactly that. Like, what are the dynamics of change management and what does the IO psychology body of work and research tell us about how organizations tick? And interestingly enough, because of all that downsizing during that time, I was just like observing, okay, so what's going to happen when, at that point, it was like we were keeping all the high performers. And then there was this stigma around anyone who was let go that they weren't a high performer, when really it just boiled down to numbers and what role you were in and what function you could play in moving the business forward. It really had nothing to do with personal capability. Another dynamic that was happening at the same time was this increase with LinkedIn.
Mm, mhm.
And, coming from a brand marketing background, I had a lot of empathy for professionals who had never had to market themselves like a brand marketer, like you do a resume,
Right,
but it didn't have your picture on it at that time. You weren't using catchwords, like it had a very linear kind of process to it. And so now enters this new world where you have to like put yourself out there and figure out how to market yourself and keywords. And I was like, there's a big portion of the population that is not ready for this.
yeah.
Once I got into my education, I landed my first consulting job in IO with a small consulting firm, and I got to see how that played out in real time. So now we're almost post recession, and all of these dynamics that I had seen were coming up. We were hiring, and I'm getting statements like, well, don't hire anybody who's been out of work for more than a year. Well, at that point, that was like 75% of the population had been out of work for a year. And I said, that's really short-sighted that we have these markers that kind of legitimize a person's worth in the workforce based off of one decision.
Wow.
They could have spent 20 years with a company, but now all of a sudden they're not worthy of another opportunity, or we don't see the value that they bring in. But it was because the frame of thought was anybody who's worth keeping, they're working right now because their employees kept them. And you were seeing those top players just circulate from company to company because they could ask for top dollar.
Right.
So that was one of the dynamics. And then the well-being aspect of work. Shortly after that, I think things started to shift because millennials were entering the workplace and we were catering more to what they wanted in a workplace. And so then I started to see some of the things I wanted to see, more of an emphasis on work-life balance, better perks and opportunities. And after the master's, I just thought if you've gone this far with IO and you're enjoying it, I love to learn. I might as well just go ahead and take it to the PhD level. And so I committed to putting in that extra 6 years
Wow.
to get more in depth into the research and understand not just what the research says, but my mission was how can I activate this research when I come out of this doctorate and dissertation and really use it to move people and organizations forward. And
Nice.
I got my wish.
Yeah. Yeah, no, yeah, I love that. And there's so many points in that story. Thank you for sharing that. That I want to highlight and that stood out to me. I mean, for one, just the you talked about the elements of well-being and life balance earlier in your story, and then talked about how working with Richard Branson, you kind of saw a clear philosophy being embodied throughout the workplace, which I feel is super interesting. And then talked about just how the lack of transparency was felt and kind of the impact that it had on you, but also on the other team members. So I'm going to ask you about a specific problem that you solved. But first, I'm curious now that you have been studying specifically in this realm of well-being in the workplace for many years now. If you had to state your philosophy on employee well-being, what how would you how what would you say? How would you define that?
Really good question. Um, I think it would boil down to something simple that we all kind of get wrong, which is shifting to the platinum rule instead of the golden rule.
Mm,
So
okay.
we're not treating others as we want to be treated. We're treating others as they want and need to be treated. And I think that's the distinction in when you're thinking about well-being as the leading factor for driving team performance. It's taking into account what do each of these individuals need to perform at their optimal best and to thrive in work and life.
I love that. And in your experience, what has been the best, I won't say best way, or just an efficient way for employers to understand what that is? Because it almost seems it could be weird to some people to say, okay, well, you come here just to work. I don't want to get too involved in your personal life,
Yeah.
but there's clearly and I'm sure research states this, that the more aligned a person feels between the professional values and personal values, the better they show up and the more engaged they are. So what are some efficient ways where how employees, can do that, like understand what really makes their people thrive?
So there's a few things. I am 2 years into my role with Hightower, and I came in with the CEO had a challenge that they wanted to resolve. Better inter-team dynamics, which I think, when we talk about well-being, we like to externalize it to like, here's all the things that an employee can do to make themselves well. Yes, we need to exercise, we need to eat good food, we need to monitor all of our critical health challenges, go to the doctor, get our checkups. But we can't ignore that the work environment often has embedded in it some of the very stressors that are causing us the problems in the first place. So, team dynamics. If they're not great, people are stressed. Maybe one or two people may not be stressed, but for the most part, a lot of people are carrying around stress from just trying to communicate well with each other. If you just think about your own one-on-one relationships with your parents, with your siblings, how many times communication becomes an issue. And then you throw in someone that you don't know at all, and you have to work with them 8+ hours a day. It's an even bigger challenge. So, coming from a communications and marketing background, I've always understood that the relationship leads the rest of the dynamic.
Mm,
So where are people's relationship building skills and how do they think about building a relationship when they're at work? For some, it may be these are just the people I work with. I really don't need to be any more involved in that. But I think we can see in the best team dynamics, there is a level of intimacy and knowing each other and what that person needs to like get up and give the presentation so well. Like they need to have that backing from their team or they need that kind of encouragement. I think the more you work with someone and you understand their strengths and where they stumble, you get to like just take your team to a different level because there's a knowing about, here's what's going to make us perform great, and here's where we are always faltering because we're burned out, we're doing too much. So for me, it was about making sure I understood the dynamic of the whole team, not just the leadership team, but also who they impact because often we'll stop at this top layer and think, all right, well, we did those trainings for them and they seem to get it, so everything must be great. But if you start talking lower, below to their team level, you find out, eh, not so much. It's not being felt from the bottom up. And so I definitely feel like when it comes to development of teams, we have to think about holistically.
mm,
It does no good to train up here if it's not going to cascade down. And I think we've all been in those environments where, your boss comes in, oh my gosh, I went to this great training and you're going to get it soon, but soon never comes,
Yeah.
they forget everything that they learned because they never were told to apply it on a regular basis.
Right.
So, my hypothesis is if we find out what the root causes are of our discord that affects our productivity, that affects our efficiency, and affects our well being, and we address those issues, then we can unpack and get through all of the challenges that are coming in the way of our business.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you for that. And you kind of moved ahead in the process here, which I like a lot. You talked about how at Hightower when we first got there were clearly some things that the CEO wanted to change within the team dynamics, and you clearly stated your hypothesis, which was great. So I'm curious about what specific steps or interventions that you put in place to, I guess, test this hypothesis and yeah, and how did you, like, engage the leaders
Sure.
and people? Yeah.
So I would say that getting a doctorate gave me a healthy respect for data that I
Ooh,
did not
nice.
have prior. I've always enjoyed qualitative data. I like anecdotal feedback. I love unsolicited feedback. Um, Surveys are great, but those are solicited. So sometimes I'm like, I don't know if that's really a true answer. Like I question it. For us, I was like, I need an instrument to get a baseline on where the team is. And so I did some searching through the research and found a team effectiveness survey that had, based on what my interviews had pulled out as main themes, addressed every bucket of concern within the organization currently. And so we took that survey within a month or two of me getting started, and that became the foundation for sharing with them. Here's what you think about your team currently, what you think about each other and the dynamic. And then here's what we're going to start working on and laying out a plan for them that we're going to implement this. We implemented a lot of things around psychological safety because we recognized that the team was having some trust issues. Trust is a foundation of a high performing team. So let's start baking this language and understanding what psychological safety means. Goes really speaks to that platinum rule as well of find out what your coworkers need from you and try to operate from that perspective. We took that first baseline. I gave them the report out, gave them the plan for the year, and then we took the assessment again um, the following year and increased our lowest scores by 30 to 50%.
Wow.
I think teams are living organisms, so I'm always telling them we're going to take the next assessment, but then we're going to see what's the next thing that we have to work on. This is not about
Mm,
achieving fives across the board. This is about understanding where in our journey we need to continue to develop, especially as we brought on new team members, because that shifts the dynamic again. It's like a system, one change affects everyone else.
mm,
So we'll be doing our second year with our new team members
mm.
this month to see how that has changed our dynamic and what might be some new things we need to work on, and also where we were really excelling.
Yeah, yeah, that's so cool, and I like how you had the metrics. You know, you spoke on the data, and that's one of the questions and conversations that always comes up when I'm discussing with leaders about employee well-being. They're like, okay, how does this affect the bottom line, or like, what is the how do you quantify? Like, is this? And I think we even had this conversation. Is this qualitative or is this quantitative? Like,
Yeah.
what's the impact? So I guess I'm curious about that. Can you talk a little bit about yeah about that, like how you measure
Mhm.
how you measure these things? Yeah.
So the team effectiveness survey is all quantitative. So a ranking of on a scale of 1 to 5, whether or not you feel you are seeing that particular question. It is 26 questions
Oh wow.
that are divided into 8 different categories of team effectiveness. And I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but some of them have to do with communication. Some of them have to do with inter-team dynamics. Some of them have to do with collaboration specifically. And so in that baseline, I could see, okay, our 5 lowest scores were this. So these are the things we're really going to hyper focus on. Here's where our strengths are that are going to carry us through and keep these scores rising. But when we even saw the higher scores rising up, that was like proof point that everyone was really absorbing what we were learning around psychological safety, using our DISC assessments as a point of reference for each other. We tried some different tools online to understand our communication style better that would like feed us back information after a meeting and tell you, here's what you did great in the meeting, here's where you could improve. Um, Probably too many tools initially for the team to absorb. And even just this way of thinking about assessing ourselves was probably different. They all embraced it, so that was the good part, because I could imagine that had the team been larger or if I'd tried to deploy it across the entire organization, we wouldn't have had as much success. But we were just a group of 12,
Mm.
so just small enough for us to be able to wrap our heads around it. The qualitative information comes in throughout the year. So once I have those annual scores, then I know what we're looking for, and we actually integrated that with our engagement pulse surveys. So we have other feedback that we're getting from the organization, and whenever something comes up related to something that we scored lower on or that we know we need to work on, giving them that data to say, hey, remember, we already knew that we needed to work on this. Here's what the teams are telling us still needs work.
Mm.
Or here's where the teams are saying we're doing a much better job. That is very confirming for them to know that the effort that they're putting in is being not necessarily directly recognized because they don't necessarily know all of the details of the survey, but they know that the work that we're putting in on the development side is not for, it's not for fun time. It's actually to move the business forward.
Right, 100%. That's super cool, and I like how I was curious about that, the scale at which, you were able to implement this, but starting out with a small group, it sounds like,
Mhm.
yeah, that was strategic and proved effective. Were there any programs or tools that you implemented that had a surprising impact?
I think not surprising because I had gone through the psychological safety framework at a previous employer. And so I really loved the way that it opened people's awareness to the fact that not everyone thinks like them, not everyone perceives the work dynamic, the environment the same way, and just having that simplified understanding of like these personality types
Mm,
and what that means for them when you're talking to them. Like if you have someone who really values security, they need a lot of detail. So if you are a low context communicator, you're going to need to amp up your context, give them more details, give them details that you don't even think are necessary, but that for this person is going to be like the very thing that calms them down and makes them feel anchored and grounded and like they understand what's going on. And I think, you know, we really strive at Hightower to be transparent and to be non-hierarchical.
mm,
And that's hard to do sometimes because you do sometimes question like at what point should we be revealing certain information, certainly the information that we're bringing in, like what's sensitive and what isn't. But I think slowly we've learned like not much is super sensitive. And there's only a benefit a lot of times. And I'm going to make the caveat, we are an organization of 100 people.
okay.
So if you're talking about the 11,000 plus person organization that I came from, I can understand their decision making is a little bit different. But consistent communication, transparent communication really just helps everyone feel secure in the work that they're doing, what might be coming around the corner, even if that transparency means we don't know yet. Here's the things that we're weighing out. We always have your best interest in mind, but just know that these are going to be tough decisions for us to make. I think that works better than we're not going to tell you until we've decided, and then we're just going to like hit you with all the fears that you've probably been brewing in your head anyway.
100%. And that sounds like that's a lesson that just came from your experience, right? With
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, I always try to operate from what have I experienced as an employee
mm,
and what would I have liked that experience to feel like, to have contained that would have made the difference in my level of trust in that organization.
yeah, that's so good. So I have one or maybe two more questions, but I'm curious about just how what you've learned throughout this experience with Hightower, maybe, but maybe even prior and from your
Mhm.
studies too. Like, what are principles that you've learned over time that still guide your work today? And then why are they important for other leaders to implement, to increase just the performance uh, and the effectiveness of their teams?
Um, One would be like the best practices for building habits, like the Charles Duhigg, you know, small incremental habits, building up to bigger habits, using that, 10-minute building blocks versus a whole day of building blocks. So we really tried not to overburden people with heavy amounts of homework or
Mm,
giving them all of the information without breaking out a little piece that they can try in their day-to-day work.
mm,
And so making sure to connect the dots between learning something new, like psychological safety, and how do you use that at work in a way that's useful for you.
mm,
May not be useful for Tom, might not be useful that way for Susan, but for Kelly, it works really well when she does it this way. And so the variety of ways to use things, not just thinking, okay, I would use it this way. Well, that doesn't mean that that's how everyone else is thinking or that that's what's most useful in everyone else's day to day. So, we're talking a lot in the work world about inclusivity, um, and how we address different backgrounds, how we address different ways of thinking, how we address different personality types, neurodivergence and neurodiversity, and what that means. Things we've probably always seen but didn't have a language for before. Now people are understanding how to communicate to their manager or their teams. Like, I love it when I'm in a meeting and someone says, I throw out a question and someone goes, I can't answer that right now. That's not the way my brain works.
wow. Clear.
Great. Yeah. Super clear and accepted.
Yeah.
Feel free to tell us what you think after you've had some time to think about it. If you think it merits, something for the group, but not pressuring everyone into the same mold of like what's the expected thing to do, and honoring that some other people, have a different way of approaching things. You know, I always tell people in meetings, like I always try to lead with well-being elements, and as a team, we're really learning how to bake that into the way that we work so that we can bring the burnout and manage it, make it more manageable, which then also equates to workload and when do we say no to something? When do we say later? Uh,
Mhm.
those are hard things to do when you know what the goal is and you're trying to get there. So the tendency is to do the default. Let's just work, 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 work until, we're all dizzy in the face
All right.
and then we'll see what happens. But instead of recognizing that human bodies need rest and recovery.
Yep.
They actually operate better when they have rest and recovery. Acknowledging that technology is not always our friend. It is our friend when we know how to use it so that it works with our human system,
Mm,
that we can overload ourselves with this, um, that certain brains are taking in the information differently because of the technology, and how do you, accommodate them so that they feel like they're on a level playing field with everyone else, even down to designing meetings and making sure that there's like solo time to think for people who need quiet, that when everyone starts talking, that you make sure you hit everyone because some people are, reticent to break into the conversation, and managing the ones who are like verbal, like high context verbal output thinkers, and they just like want to tell you everything that's in their head, and how other people are receiving that. Because, I've had conversations where I'm like, oh, I thought you wanted all of those things. No, I was just talking out loud. Just talking out loud. So clarity on like
yeah.
what our thinking process is. And I think when we're at work, that's what work is all about. It's about
Mm,
putting our best talents and skill sets forward. It's not the technical work. It's like the way that we do things
mm,
that is special. Otherwise, we're, how do you decide between different candidates? There is skill set, but then there's also the final factor usually boils down to person organization fit. Do we
mm,
think that they are an added value to this team? Do they bring a different perspective? Are they going to get along with the way that this team works?
Yeah, yeah, that's so good, and I appreciate you bringing your wealth of knowledge here and just and sharing, you know, so openly. This is very helpful and interesting and informative. One of my main takeaways is that when building a company and building a team, it's living, like you said, a living organism, and you have to be aware of how it's performing and feeling, and how when you add or take away what that does, and not just trying to uh, you know, do a quick fix, but really be intentional, right? Be
Yeah,
intentional about how you are building and molding, you know, and nurturing nurturing this living organism that you have, which is your team. So
yeah.
yeah, so this has been
Yeah, and I mean, I personally, when I think about work and, the one of the bigger conversations now is like return to office after we've all been working from home for so long, and it puzzles me sometimes, like, why are we still talking about that? But we're still talking about it because we really never address, like, what happened to people in
yeah.
2020.
Oh wow.
You know, everyone changed.
Mhm.
Everyone changed. Everyone's
100%.
perspective on life changed, maybe something traumatic happened in their family that they're still dealing with, um, and we learned that when we have time, we can invest our minds and our energies into other things, and we liked that. So I think we need to look at work and go, how can we bring more of that feeling back into what was the norm, and recreate what that norm looks and feels like?
Yeah, so good. Awesome. Well, thank you again, and thank you to all of our viewers watching this. And if you want to get in touch with Kavivi, I'll have her LinkedIn somewhere on the screen. And yeah, could connect, reach out, and if you have any questions, yeah, feel free to send a message. But thank you for watching, and Kavivi, thank you for being here.
You for having me,
I look forward to keeping in touch.
for sure.
So see you all on the next one.